Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and you think about the food that really sustains you, that really nourishes us. That's the kind of food we're going to be wanting to have in our future, wanting to have right now, and that's what my guest and I are going to be talking about. But first, let's have energy news with Rick.
Thanks, Janaea. In a recent Peak Moment news, we reported some startling numbers for our military use of fuel and energy. Today, we have a special report on this topic. In a recently released 65-page document entitled Energy Trends and Implications for the U.S. Army Installations, published by the Army Corps of Engineers and authored by Westerfelt and Fournier, we see that what appear to be the first signs of the military becoming aware of and seriously concerned about peak oil. This is important enough that I'm going to read some sections verbatim from the document. The introduction starts, "The energy situation is highly uncertain for the Army, the nation, and the world. Now is the time to consider both short-term and long-term issues to develop enduring energy policies and solutions for our military installations to discern an effective and viable path for the Army's energy future, to sustain its mission and ensure the capability to protect and support the forces. The Army must insulate itself from the economic and logistical energy-related problems coming in the near to mid-future. This requires a transition to modern, secure, and efficient energy systems and building safe, environmentally friendly technologies. This is both a supply-side and demand-side challenge requiring integrated solutions and thoughtful planning and execution." Continuing in the section entitled Energy Trends, the report goes on to state, "The Army and the nation's heavy use of oil and natural gas is not in sync with the nation's or the Earth's supplies. The relative fuel shares of energy use versus energy reserves underscores our need to supplement oil and natural gas as our staple fuels. The domestic supply and demand imbalance would lessen if coal and/or nuclear energy were made more environmentally acceptable, or if the renewable share of our energy portfolio were to increase." Then in the section called Petroleum Trends, they continue with, "The supply of oil will remain fairly stable in the very near term, but oil prices will steadily increase as world production approaches its peak. The doubling of oil prices in the past couple of years is not an anomaly, but a picture of the future. Peak oil is at hand with low availability growth for the next 5 to 10 years. Once worldwide petroleum production peaks, geopolitics and market economics will result in even more significant price increases and security risks. To guess where this is all going to take us would be too speculative. Oil wars are certainly not out of the question. Disruption of world oil markets may also affect world natural gas markets as much as the natural gas reserves are co-located with oil reserves." In their summary, they close with this. Please bear with me, it's rather long. "The days of inexpensive, convenient, abundant energy sources are quickly drawing to a close. Domestic natural gas production peaked here in 1973. The proved domestic reserve lifetime for natural gas at current consumption rates is about 8.4 years in this country. The proved world reserve lifetime for natural gas is about 40 years, but will follow a traditional rise to a peak and then a very rapid decline. Domestic oil production peaked in 1970 in this country and continues to decline. Proved domestic reserve lifetime for oil is about 3.4 years. World oil production is at or near its peak, and current world demand exceeds the supply. Saudi Arabia is considered the bellwether nation for oil production and has not increased production since April of 2003. After peak production, supply no longer meets demand and prices and competition increase. The proved reserve lifetime for world oil is now about 41 years. Most of this at a declining availability. Our current throwaway nuclear cycle will consume the world's reserve of low-cost uranium in about 20 years. Unless we dramatically change our consumption practices, the Earth's finite resources of petroleum and natural gas will become depleted in this century. Coal supplies may last into the next century depending on technology and consumption trends as it starts to replace oil and natural gas. We must act now to develop the technology and infrastructure necessary to transition to other energy sources and energy-efficient technologies. Policy changes, leap-ahead technology breakthroughs, cultural changes, and significant investment is requisite for this new energy future. Time is essential to enact these changes. The process should begin now. Our best options for meeting future energy requirements are energy efficiency and renewable sources. Energy efficiency is the least expensive, most readily available, and environmentally friendly way to stretch our current energy supplies. This ensures that we get the most benefit from every BTU used. It involves optimizing operations and controls to minimize waste and infusing state-of-the-art technology and techniques where appropriate. The potential savings for the Army is about 30% of current and future consumption. Energy efficiency measures usually pay for themselves over the life cycle of the application, even when only face value costs are considered. Renewable energy options make use of the Earth's resources that are not depleted by our energy consumption practices, namely solar, wind, geothermal, geoexchange, hydrology, tidal movements, agricultural products, and municipal wastes. Renewable options also make use of the large stretches of land in America, much of which is owned by the government. These options are available, sustainable, and secure. The affordability of renewable technologies is improving steadily. If the market is pulled by large Army applications, cost reductions could be dramatic. For efficiency and renewables, the intangible and hard to quantify benefits, for example, reduced pollution and increased security, yield indisputable economic value. Many of the issues in the energy area are outside the control of the Army. Several actions are in the purview of the national government to foster the ability of all groups, including the Army, to optimize their natural resource management. The Army needs to present its perspective to higher authorities and to be prepared to proceed regardless of the national measures that are taken. Steps by the national government that would help the Army with its energy challenges include the increase of supplies, the modernization of infrastructure, the diversification of sources, the optimization of end use, the minimization of environmental impact, and the cooperation in global energy markets. In these times of tightening traditional energy options, the Army needs to take steps comparable to those in the national agenda mentioned above. In addition to pulling technology markets, cooperating in regional purchases and leveraging alternative financing. Special attention to the diversifications of sources is appropriate. This incorporates a massive expansion of renewable energy purchases, a vast increase in renewable distributed generation, including photovoltaic, solar thermal, wind, microturbines, biomass, and the large-scale networking of on-site generation. The awareness of the energy options, trends, and trade-offs, and the implications of Army installations allows for informed decisions, targeted planning, and pertinent investment. The Army must continue to improve and optimize its energy and water management to meet mission requirements. Whew, that was a lot. This document is a significant breakthrough not only for our military, but for our government, our country, and even the world. They clearly state that peak oil is real, is on the very near horizon, and will have very serious implications not only for the Army and our military, but for every segment of our nation's economy. They go on to emphasize conservation and efficiency as the most effective first steps in dealing with the problem and look to a wide combination of alternative renewable sources of energy as long-term solutions. Given that our military is currently the biggest single purchaser of oil in the world, it's great to see this kind of forward thinking coming from the Army. This document, minus the specific references to the Army, could easily serve as a blueprint that every nation could start with in their process to prepare for peak oil. Peak Moment considers this document and related documents to be of significant importance. We will be adding these documents to our website, applenc.org, so that you can read the details that time doesn't allow for today. Next time we'll look more into the details of just what energy resources our military uses. That's all the news we have time for now, so back to Janaea and her guest.
Thanks, Rick. You know, that is encouraging. I was thinking, I'm with my guest, Shan Kendall, and as we were listening to that, I was really thinking that they really clearly laid out what we haven't heard from any of our government sources in the United States. Here's the problem. It is here with us. here's what we have to do to begin to save energy, efficiency, and so on, and do both supply and demand side and look at what the renewables. I mean, this is encouraging. Okay, Shan, we're talking about sustaining ourselves, and of course energy is going to be part of that picture. You're an educator and about nutrition and about, so let's start with the energy for us. How did you get into, what you know about nutrition sort of turns on its head some standard thinking about foods, and tell us about it.
Yes, what I'm looking at when I call my nutrition, I call it sustainable nutrition. What is it that's going to sustain me in my life and work, and what is it that's going to sustain the next generation? Now, I've already had my children, but I'm looking at my children and my grandchildren. How can a generation keep happening? At the moment, the nutrition that's out there just doesn't do it.
Well, standard American nutrition is worrisome, actually, when it's full of empty calories and empty fats and empty sugars and
obesity and diabetes are rampant among young children today.
Which is, I mean, unimaginable to me. So what is it that, what would you have to, I mean, what would we be doing differently for sustainable?
What we would be doing differently for sustainable food would be looking not at how can we eat less fat, but how can we eat fats that nourish us, nourish our brains, and satisfy us.
Now, wait a minute. That's just the opposite of what we're talking. I mean, our American thing says...
You were very right when you said that.
Says, I mean, everything is about less fat and heart disease and all of that. What do you mean, more fat, but good fat?
More fat, but good fat. Well, best fat comes from animals that are produced on grass. And that's not looking at the animals that are eating grain, because that, as we've really looked at, is not a very energy efficient way of producing our food. But animals eating grass.
Which is traditional. I mean,
that's
animals
the traditional.
Traditionally are pastured on grass.
Yes, right.
So go back to for a second. Animals fed on grain, of course, we're looking at the inefficiencies of you have to raise all the energy it takes to raise the grain and process the grain and get the grain over to where the cows are, which is how most of our
That's how most of our meat,
produced.
But that's not the meat that I would want to eat, or the fat from the animals that are grown that way.
So is there qualitative difference in the fat?
Absolutely.
Really?
There absolutely is. And that's a very important aspect of what I'm teaching and bringing to people. And it goes along with the teachings of Weston A. Price, who was a dentist who lived back in the 1930s and 40s. He was alarmed at the children that came into his office because they had crooked teeth, and he'd never seen that before. Cavities, yes, but crooked teeth, no.
Which says there's some major deficiency in their nutrition.
Something else wrong.
Something happening.
Different from what their parents had. And so he asked two very important questions. The first question was, are there healthy people alive in the world?
In the world, okay.
And if so, what is the food that nourishes them? And so he and his wife spent the better part of the next decade, summers, closed the office, out of town, and went traveling to various parts of the world looking for people who might be healthy. And he found over those decade 14 different groups. And if you want to be like one of those 14 groups, he also delineated what it was that made their diet different from the standard American diet of the 1930s, folks.
The 1930s, and of course we were eating closer to the farm, and we didn't have sugar-coated puffs in the 1930s, I don't think.
We didn't have quite so many processed foods then as we do now.
So what would, in a nutshell, what did he learn from those 14
They ate
cultures?
no processed foods. They used everything. When they used an animal food, they used the whole animal. They got their minerals from the bones of the animal. They got their vitamins because these were animals that were eating as God had intended them to, using the solar energy that went into the grass.
Okay.
And if it was fish, that was the algae in the ocean, the plankton. And if it was the grass the chickens were out there on the grass, the pigs were out there on the grass, and the cows were out there on the grass.
So did he find people eating more animal sources? Did they have, what else did they have in their diet? And I mean, vegetables, fruits, nuts,
yes,
those
they
kinds
had
of things
vegetables,
to supplement?
fruits, nuts. They had foods, though, that were properly prepared. Grains had to be soaked or soured. They used a lot of fermented foods in their diet. They ate a high percentage of their calories, though, came from fats. Mm-hmm. Between 50 to 80% of their calories came from fats.
That's staggeringly different than we're being told in our
Absolutely.
time. 80% of your calories in
but if
fats.
You try eating more fats from animals that are properly raised, or coconut oil, these saturated fats feed your brain and will satisfy you very quickly.
Well,
I don't need a lot of food.
I have to make a confession here, crew, is that I learned about this from Shan last summer and decided I'll give this a try. I mean, it really does turn it on your head. And so I've eaten more butter and more grass-fed beef because and eggs, wonderful eggs. And what I find is true is that I am not hungry for the carbohydrate, the little starch snacks. I am not hungry for those. I'm not wanting cookies or crackers or something else to fill a need that I didn't know would be met by fats.
Yes.
And I want to add is that I haven't picked up weight, which was, of course, a big fear. Is like, well, if I eat a whole lot more fats, I'll just get fatter, and that's not been true.
No,
there's something to this.
The other thing was that all of these cultures that he found that were sustained by these nourishing foods took special care for their following generation. And they gave these most nutrient-dense foods, the organ meats or the foods that were the richest, to the pregnant women or to the mothers and fathers-to-be before they conceived, and also to the babies and young children.
So nutrient dense. Let's go back for a moment. What do you mean by nutrient dense food?
Well, just about everything they did increased the nutrients that they got in their food, whereas today just about everything we do decreases the nutrients in our foods.
Right. So they're
the
hollow
processing, the chemicalization of our soils, all of that. And in that time and age, they were. And the groups that he found, the successful groups, they were doing what they needed to keep their soil mineralized, to keep their animals healthy, or their sources of food, whatever it was, the densest and the most full of nutrients. And there's lots more that we could talk about Weston Price, but if you want to see more, you could go to westonaprice.org and explore that very rich website to yourself. Suit yourselves.
I think I remember learning that the people lived longer, didn't have the kind of systemic diseases that we have so much in our modern world, the heart disease and cancer and diabetes and so on.
Whenever they had a trading post nearby and they changed their way of eating, the following generation had dental deformities, and not only was their face narrower, but so was their pelvic, their pelvis, their lungs. They had less capacity throughout their body for a healthy body. So childbirth was more difficult.
Sure.
Everything.
Sure. So you've changed your own, how do I say this? What have you done in the last few years or so to change where you get your nutrient-dense food? What do you do?
Well, I've found as many local sources as I could for real milk or raw milk, for eggs that were being raised in pasture and on free range, for meat that came from that. And to help with that, I finally went to raising my own chickens.
So we get to see.
So I could find out and I could help educate other people who might want to be able to do that as well.
So let's take a look at Shan's chicken yard and milk cow and
Yes.
and so on. It's that's what the last 2 years that you've been
Yes, right.
been Shan Lee's happy hens.
Oh,
there they are.
there's my chickens. I have a mixed flock of 20 hens that lay eggs. Up to about 2/3 of the hens lay each day, and there they are. You can see the green beyond the fence that they can't get to except when I let them. And right there in front of it is all the greens that they're eating.
Okay.
There
they are, eating
they're
the greens.
now out there beyond the fence in the greens.
So how large an area do you have to keep? Does it keep growing? I mean, the pasture, do you have to water it and, through the summer, of course?
Yes, of course, but it only grows when, and only keeps growing if you keep them off of it a good part of the time, too.
So here's one of your laying
One of
hens.
my hens in her nesting box laying an egg.
How many hens do you have now?
20.
Yeah. Okay.
And we've talked about getting more hens, but I'm really more interested in trying to figure out how I can sustain the hens that I have.
I have to say, I love that when we get eggs from you, is that they're always these greens and browns mixed in the way you lay out. It's just so pretty. It's so pretty to have different sizes and different colors. A little art piece in every carton.
They are, and the greens, they're not all the same color. And here's Nellie, my Jersey dairy cow. Boy, that picture was taken a few weeks ago. She now looks much fatter. She's due to freshen very quickly.
So we have a calf coming on its way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the pasture for Nellie, is at a friend's.
This is at a friend's house. Yes, we don't currently have enough pasture for her.
So how much pasture and how much milk do you get from her, from one cow? There's 2 of you in your family. How many people would she feed?
Well, last year when she was in milk, and she was probably producing about half what she's capable of at that point because she was in late lactation. 8 families, I think, were getting milk from her. If we wanted to get all of our butter and cream, we'd probably cut out about half the people who.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that's classic in the concern about sustainability on the planet long term is the issue of our eating meat sources as opposed to vegetarian food sources in terms of just energy input, as well as the carbon that goes back into the atmosphere and the water that's used. So there are numbers, and I'm not going to haul them out, that it takes a whole lot of water and feed and so on to do our agricultural farming with the raising animals. And I'm wondering, since peak moment, peak oil has gotten, into your thoughts, how do you reconcile, or what kind of questions do you ask yourself about sort of sustaining all of us that traditional way versus the planet's resources?
Well, I don't think it matters which way we try to sustain people. We have more people populating our planet right now than we can sustain with the energy that we have, the energy available.
That's certainly true. We're borrowing energy from the past is what we're done, and we're sort of coming to the end of that. I just read that we use in 1 year, the biologists figured we use about the energy of 400 years of sunlight energy stored up in our oil and gas and stuff in 1 year. Well, that's not going to last for long. So we have to have fewer people.
People traditionally were either herders or they grew food in rich river valleys that were allowed to flood. And we no longer let either one of those happen. So we need to figure out some way of creating small farms that combine both the herding and the grain growing that can happen, if possible, without cultivation.
Now is that without cultivating the land? I mean, in our area, in the foothills, we would have to do something to. It's not bottomland. How do you get the the nutrients?
Well, that comes from the animal, from the manure of the animals. That's the nitrogen source and the richness that people would have had in a river valley.
So do you have a sense of how large a space, on our land, to have a cow, to pasture your cow for a year? I mean, you'd have to be growing something that she could eat in the winter, right? Mm-hmm. As well as your vegetables and fruits and nuts or whatever you could. How much space? Have you ever thought about that?
Well, if it was an ideal source that was really producing well, they say that an acre will support a cow and her calf. But around here, I don't know. I really don't know. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to find out by doing it myself.
That's a good experiment. We'll have to check in with you in another year or two after you have not only your cow and your chickens, but also if you were to try and do the bulk of your, say, vegetable and fruit source needs.
Yeah, right.
Except your coconut oil. I know
Oh, yes.
that's going to be an import.
Well, for the moment, or learn something different there.
Oh, I'm not sure. Coconut palms in the Sierra, that would be something quite unusual.
No, I meant figure out another way to get those good medium to, well, butter does a good job.
Butter's fabulous.
Yeah.
Butter. So part of what you're about is your own experiment of how we can source that food locally.
Yeah, well, my husband recently said, why don't you raise more chickens? Because there's lots of people out there who want the eggs. And I'm not so sure that's the thing I want to do next, to increase the flock size or keep the flock size about the same and see how much more of the greens and things that I want to feed them I can actually grow
yourself,
in my own
so you
garden.
don't have to get those sources from other places.
Absolutely, yes.
You thought about how oil, the increased prices of oil might affect you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking every day as, do we need 2 vehicles in our family? Because that's a lot of money to keep 2 running, not just in the cash to spend on the fuel, but insurance and everything else.
All the costs.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that in the future, you're going to be supplying food to your neighbors. I think they're going to hope you are.
Yeah, well, I'd like to have my neighbors decide they'd like to come and help with the garden and maybe
that's true.
Figure out some ways and get some of their own chickens too.
Yeah, there we go. Well, you're probably going to have to teach us how to do it. That's part of it, is that what you learn is part of passing that knowledge on so that we can have more of that sustainable base for ourselves locally. Well, Shan, I think that thank you for experimenting with this for all of us. Thank you for being out ahead of the rest of us in our community for sustainable food.
Thank you, Janaea, for a chance to talk about it.
And I just wish everybody could have as good eggs as I get to have from Shan. This is Peak Moment, and my guest, Shan Kendall, is about providing us sustainable foods. Join us for next episode of Peak Moment. Thanks for watching.